Hi, Martin here. My wife and I are just on a little day hike today. It's the second day of spring, and we're exploring some crown land in search of a lake that we saw on a map, and doing a little birding at the same time. It's really warm out, and we thought since it's so nice, we'd have a little picnic. So we brought along some bacon and eggs, and thought we'd cook up a little brunch for ourselves. And I'm using a new stove that I started using a couple of years ago called the Vital stove. It's a fan-powered twig stove, and I thought I would show you how that works. So this is a stove I've been using for a couple of years now. It's called the Vital stove by Sol Huma. It's manufactured in Canada. It's a twig stove, a fan-powered, battery-operated twig stove that burns twigs, ground litter like leaves, pine needles, pine cones, even dried manure. Just about anything you could find typically on a camping trip. The reason I started using this stove is, as much as I loved using the alcohol Trangia stove that I've used for so many years and has served me so well, I got a little tired of carrying fuel bottles and buying alcohol and carrying alcohol and other fuels into the bush. With this is all you need. You don't need anything else. You don't need to bring fuel bottles and fuel. The fuel that I'll need to boil a pot of water is this. This is enough dry fuel to burn a pot of water. Now normally that wouldn't work in most twig stoves, but this twig stove is so efficient that it will actually boil a pot of water with that. It only weighs about 1.5 pounds. It's not ideal for the ultralight crowd, but if you consider that you don't have to bring any fuel, it kind of balances out. But certainly for the average backpacker or canoe tripper, it's a perfectly acceptable weight. It's 8 inches long, it's a little under 5 inches wide, and a little under 2 inches thick, or about 1.5 inches thick. So I'll show you how to assemble it. There's a cover here that comes off, and inside this compartment here you can store your matches, your lighter, some tinder, a piece of birch bark, that sort of thing. And it also holds this battery pack. This battery pack holds 2 AA batteries. You can use rechargeables. And it plugs in here. This battery pack has an off setting, a low setting, and a high setting. And what it does is it powers a little blower fan in here. There's a heat-resistant nylon blower fan in here that draws air from the sides and below here, blows that air through this little tunnel here and into this chamber here. Then this cover is actually a diffuser. There are these little pinholes all over it, and that goes back on. Like so. And the air gets sucked from outside the stove in through here and up. Then there is a firebox that sits on top of it, and you put your twigs in that, and the air gets drawn in and up into it, and so you're getting a constantly aerated, blown twig fire, and so you're not constantly blowing on it and waving over it trying to keep the twigs going. So it's sort of self-governing that way. The battery pack, as I said, has 2 settings, low and high, which allows you to govern the amount of air that moves through it, so you can make the flame go higher or lower. There's a little shutter here that acts like a damper. When you open it up, more air goes in. When you close it, you're cutting off the air. And so between those 2 settings and this, you can control the heat output of this stove. The manufacturers claim that the heat output of this can be up to 20,000 BTUs. So I have no way of testing that, but I have no reason to doubt that you can get a really, really, really hot fire on this. I've gotten flames that have gotten this high on this little twig stove. Once you've got the damper open and the fan going as fast as it can, this thing burns like a forge. There's another stove not unlike this one called the Sierra Zip stove. It's also a battery-powered, fan-powered blowing twig stove. It works very well, but it's not very sturdy. It's lighter, but it's very, very flimsy. It's kind of tippy, and it's not very sturdy. This is a tough stove, and once it's all set up, you can put a 50-pound stone on top of it, and it won't collapse it or crush it. If you did that with a Sierra Zip stove, you would just completely destroy it. So this is a real solid, long-lasting stove. The blower fan, the battery pack, and the firebox that it comes with, and even this diffuser, those parts can all be replaced. So if you damage them or lose them at any time, you can order them through Sol Huma. So I'll just assemble this. Underneath the base, there is the firebox. It slides out. It's held in place by these brackets over here. It opens up like so. There's a notch cut out here, and the notch fits over that little tunnel that I pointed out earlier. There are little grooves all the way around so that the walls of the firebox sit very, very sturdily in it, like that, so it can't fall out. Nice and solid. And then just plug the battery pack in, and it's ready to go. There are these pot holders here. They swing out or in to accommodate whatever sort of pot you have. So if you have a very large pot and you need to boil a large quantity of water, that's no problem. It can sit on that. Just tip them out like this. If you have a very small pot or a standard camping pot, you can tip some of them in. And if you have a tiny little cup, you can tip them all in like this and rest your cup right on top. Just going to use a piece of birch bark. Open this up. Throw in a few twigs to get it started. Put the fan on high. And we're off. So we're going to boil up a little water for some tea, or rather some coffee. To feed the fire, there's a lot of room here like this, underneath the firebox. If it gets a little smoky, you just turn on the fan. It doesn't take long to get stuff boiling, and just turn the fan down and close the damper, and the flame will begin to drop down almost immediately. This is now ready. We've got a roiling boil here. And now that our coffee's about ready, we'll get our bacon and eggs ready. Now, with most twig stoves, I would not try bacon and eggs. I would not try something that requires a low, steady heat for eggs over easy. But with this stove, I can do it. This is just some pre-cooked or partially cooked bacon from home. Just wrap it in a paper towel, throw it in a Ziploc bag, and it'll stay quite good for a couple of days in the bush. And we'll finish cooking it up on this. That smells good. I'd say that's about ready. Alright, that's ready. I want to cook my eggs now, but I don't want my bacon to get cold. So I'm putting it in some paper towels to absorb some of the grease. And I'm using these little pot cozies that I made to keep that warm, so that by the time the eggs are done, the bacon will still be hot. Okay, that pan's good and hot. And I'm going to get my fire going again for my eggs. The nice thing about this little stove, it's easy to light up again. Just turn on that fan, throw in a few twigs, and you're off at the races. All right, time for some eggs. Now, the eggs we bring along, these are fresh eggs. On a camping trip, you can bring eggs, fresh eggs, uncooked eggs for the first couple of days. We pack them in an Nalgene bottle in paper towels, and they're so jammed in there that they won't break. I also keep my bacon in there and a bit of butter. And the nice thing about an Nalgene bottle is it has other uses. We use it for water and all sorts of other things while we're in the bush, so there's no need to bring a special purpose egg container that then becomes useless bulk and weight and has to be packed out. Oops. All right, that looks about ready to flip over. We like our eggs over easy. So the eggs are done and flipped. So I've just got a little fire going here, and we're just going to toast a bit of pita bread here so we can have some toast with our bacon and eggs and coffee. Hot coffee, toast, bacon, and eggs over easy.
Thanks, honey.
You're welcome.
Good.
So what are the pros and cons of this stove? I'll start with the cons, the downsides. The first is that it's battery operated. It requires batteries, which means you've got to pack batteries in with you, and possibly spare batteries if you're going to be gone long enough. Now, the manufacturer claims that the batteries will last 35 to 40 hours. I have no reason to doubt that, actually. I've had this stove for a couple of years. I've used it a dozen times now. I've even baked bread on it, which means it was a continuous burn for an hour, and still I don't seem to be anywhere close to losing battery life. It's not slowing down at all. So I'm not worried about battery life. The second downside is, again, having to do with the technology of it. There's a fan in here, there's a moving part, and anything with moving parts can fail. And then if that did happen, you'd have no way of repairing it. You'd have to just use it as an ordinary twig stove without the fan, and that would sort of take out the biggest advantage of this particular stove. But every stove, except for the Trangio or a simple alcohol burner, has moving parts and seals and things that can clog and jam and fail. So if you're willing to bear that kind of risk, this is no worse than any other stove. The third downside is that it's a fire that burns wood, and so it's sooty and ashy. And some people don't like that kind of mess. They like a cleaner burn. They like a stove and that they bring with their own fuel that burns completely clean and doesn't make a mess of things. So you'll get sooty hands and sooty pots if you use this. And the last thing, and this for me is the biggest downside, is that you have to tend it. It's a twig stove, and so you're not putting in huge pieces of wood. You can put in bigger chunks and afford yourself more time, but you have to feed it fairly consistently and constantly while you're cooking, otherwise it'll go out after a couple of minutes. You can't walk away. With my Trangio stove or most other stoves, you can put something on to boil and walk away and come back 15 minutes later and it's still going. You can't do that. You have to tend a twig stove. But it is easy to tend. You saw me tending it. This is what's involved in tending it. And you can slip them in under the pot, or if you don't like to do that and you want to break off a whole handful of them, you just lift your pot off and dump them in. That'll work too. What are the positives? Well, the biggest positive is how little fuel you need. Ecologically, it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to go and cut down a lot of wood. You don't have to go hunting for it. If you're in a campground or a campsite where the ground litter and all the available wood has been picked clean by previous campers, it's not going to be a problem. All you need is one good dead branch and you can cook your meal. If you get to a campsite and it's pouring rain, it's sometimes hard to, harvest dry wood. Well, this is going to be easy because even in the pouring rain, you can find under a an old tree, you can find those small little dry dead branches close to the trunk that will be dry, and you'll be able to get your fire going. The biggest advantage from the standpoint of camp cuisine, though, is that you have temperature control. With most twig stoves or open campfires, you have no real temperature control short of moving your whatever you're cooking closer or further from the heat. But this gives you three ways. You can use hardwood or softwood, small pieces of wood or big chunks of hardwood. You have this little damper here that opens and closes to control the air intake, and you have your fan with two settings. Another positive is that because you don't have to bring your own fuel, you don't have to carry any extra weight. The full weight of this is about 1.5 pounds, and that's pretty light. It's pretty nice not having to devote extra space in your pack and carry extra weight on a portage because you're bringing fuel and fuel bottles. So it's kind of nice not having to worry about that. That to me is a huge plus. I used to actually resent that about my Trangia stoves having to carry fuel. There's one other feature that of this stove that might be of interest to you if you are a Trangia stove user or if you use a small alcohol burning stove, such as a homemade stove. This firebox, which comes off and folds flat, is very easy to pack on a day trip or a camping trip. You can use it right over top of your Trangia or alcohol stove, and there you've got a windscreen and a pot holder that folds flat for backpacking. That could be your whole stove if you don't need a lot of temperature control and you're just going to boil some water. All right, we'll just put this away now. Good little stove.